Hello, my quilting friends. My name is Leah Day, and welcome to episode 98 of the podcast. And today I'm going to be talking about figuring out whether you need to just let a project go or if you should continue to muscle through it and see it all the way through to completion. I'm thinking about this with the project I have been working on for the last 3 months, and something that I have decided to just set down and pick up something else that I want to work on more. And I want to just talk about that process and letting go of that feeling of like having a missing limb, that feeling like I've left something behind, and that feeling of guilt that, put a lot of time and effort and energy into something, and then I might not ever go back to that. I might not finish it. And all of this stuff I experience quite often. I have lots and lots of unfinished projects. And the inspiration for this came from a Quilt Guild meeting I just went to last week, and we were all doing show and tell. And actually, I guess this was 2 weeks ago. And someone stood up and showed a quilt, and she said, "Well, I finally finished it, and I don't even like it anymore." So it just kind of stuck out in my head like, why bother? I mean, really, honestly, why bother finishing something if you're not even in love with it anymore, if you don't like it? And even if you are in love with it and you still like that project, why continue to torture yourself with it if things just aren't working? So that's what I'm going to share about in the podcast a little later on. But I did want to give you a little update about what was going on around the house because I missed sharing the podcast last week. So if you're interested in going straight to the part about finishing projects, you can find a timestamp below the video, below your player, and that will tell you where to jump ahead and listen to just that section of the podcast. But I always like to share what's really going on behind the scenes and what I'm knocking around the house with. And so first off, last week I was just kind of in a crazy busy state with editing my book, Rise to the Challenge of Your Life. And I'm going to be talking about this book quite a lot today. And I was muscling through just trying to get a lot of work done. I had contacted an editor to start working on the book, and I had kind of a deadline to get everything done and sent to her by Friday. And when I get into editing book mode, that seems to be like the one time that I kind of want to just clear the decks of everything. I'll be honest, I mean, I kind of sound grouchy even to myself. And so that's why I can't shoot the podcast on those weeks. Because if I try to, and in the past I have tried to shoot the podcast on days like that, it comes across really bad. I come across pretty grouchy and not in the mood to be open and sharing and fun and carefree and all that good stuff. So I kind of picked up on that energy last week, decided, I'm going to take a week off of the podcast. That's okay. It's not, the world's not going to end. It's okay. Gave myself that break, and I got the edits done, and then kind of got all of that off my back. And then I caught a cold. So it was kind of a mixture of working so hard, and most likely it was the stress and the, just pedal to the metal work on that one project that caused me to get a cold. And I have not been feeling well since. I've just got this kind of stuffy nose thing going on. I honestly started wondering if it was allergies today because my nose is running and will not stop. And then I've had this sore throat thing going on too, where 2 nights ago, I could not sleep without a cough drop in my mouth the whole time, and I hate that. And so I haven't been sleeping well. So if I look tired, it's because I am. I'm not feeling all that great, and that's okay. We have our upside, our up times. And I know 2 weeks ago when I shared Frank's podcast, I was just kind of on the moon. I was feeling great. I had, was kind of riding on finishing energy. I'd finished so many different things. And then today I'm not riding on that kind of energy at all. So it just goes to show, 2 weeks later, you can be feeling totally different. And that's how I'm feeling today. I'm kind of tired, kind of stuffy, kind of, I woke up at 6:30 this morning and I could not go back to sleep. So I just decided I'll just go ahead and get up and start puttering around the house. And I'm glad I did that because I got some exercise time. I got some quiet time to myself before James got up. And, it was a good morning, but I am definitely feeling more worn out. And that's okay. Like I said, we have times of great energy, and those are the times could really, tap in and enjoy it and be happy and relish that feeling in the moment. And then there are times like this where it's like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to treat myself to a nap in a little while. And that's going to be great. So what am I working on? I, of course, have just a little bit more stitching left on my Pregnant Goddess quilts. This is Eye of Calm, just in case you've been missing some podcast episodes. She is a mixture of batik, island batik fabrics, and Dupioni silk. And I am almost done with this hand applique. I'm so pleased with it. I just have, 2 little lines to stitch. Well, not really little, but 2 long lines to stitch through here, and then I'll be done and ready to hand stitch it down to the background fabric. And I was thinking about that as far as how I want to do that, how I want to handle it, because I'm noticing that the silk, even though it has been starched to within an inch of its life, it is still wanting to go kind of wobbly-bobbly on me. It's wanting to shift in a strange way too. Most of the time quilting cotton, you cannot, kind of tell how it's doing its thing and be able to keep it on track. This stuff is really weird with how it likes to shift around. So what I'm thinking about doing, and this is just in my head, I'm kind of processing the idea, I'm thinking about putting the background fabric, which is another piece, it's a piece of purple Dupioni silk. I'm going to put that on the long arm, and I'm going to put my piece of polyester batting on the long arm. And then I'm going to put water-soluble thread in the top and bottom, and I'm going to secure this down into the middle of my background fabric using the long arm to stitch through all the layers. And that will allow me to make sure that the goddess quilt is centered up nicely and that she is stretched out the way she should be over that piece of background fabric, so there's no extra puddles and extra bits of fabric, kind of puddling up where it would start to pleat and do weird stuff as I quilt over it. So making sure that the quilt has good tension, that's kind of my goal. And then I thought, what else could I do while it's on the long arm? I could then go ahead and basically have the quilt top basted to that piece of polyester batting, and that could be the first step to trapunto. Trapunto is when you go over a quilt and you add puffy elements with the batting. So I basically stitch it and then I clip away. And I've taught that step by step in a workshop called the Heart and Feather Whole Cloth. If you're interested in learning how to do trapunto or learning how to do a whole cloth, that's really a great baseline tutorial to get you started. And so I could go on ahead and knock out all of that. At least, getting the quilt stable. And then if I wanted to, I could do the trapunto stitching on my home machine. I could put it back on the long arm. It's really entirely open at that stage. I could go either way. And I like that idea. So my plan right now is to finish up this last little bit of hand applique and then have some time to play around on the long arm and see if that's going to work. And then I'll be back to hand applique a little bit to finish off. I'll need to stitch around the outer blue turned under edge. I'll need to hand stitch that to the purple background. And then that will be it for the hand stitching, unless I decide to add some hand quilting or something. I don't know. I haven't decided. I am leaning towards a much more simple quilting design. I am thinking some feathers, something nice like that. But, I tend to go pretty dense on my goddess quilts as far as the quilting. But this Dupioni silk, it's just so pretty. It's so shiny and lustrous. I don't want to stitch it to death, I really want that to stay simple. So I'm going to have to think about that. And the shapes themselves did not end up being very big because I was limited by the width of the silk. She is only 40 inches long, which means that some of these spaces in here, these kind of beautiful curves around a pregnant goddess figure, they're only about an inch and a half wide. So there's not a lot of room to just go crazy with big feathers or anything like that. and I don't want to go the opposite route and then just stitch the whole thing to death and back again. Don't have time for that, and I'm not really interested in that. Like I said, I love the luster of this silk. I really want that to still stand out and show off. So we'll see. I'm leaving that open. I haven't really nailed that down yet. And it might be that she needs to hang on my wall for a few weeks and I need to just stare at her. I think that's always, just in general, a great idea to do with a quilt that's very special, that you really want to do a good quilting design on. Just stick it on the wall and stare at it for a few weeks, and then the inspiration will follow. I think a lot of times we run into problems with quilts because we rushed into the quilting, and rather than taking a little bit more time to stop and consider, what element of that quilt do I love the best? What do I want to really draw your attention to? What colors are my favorites? Where is there an extra element or a design or an angle that I can emphasize, that, or something that isn't even there that I could invent, that I could add with the quilting? All of those questions come from staring at the quilt for a long period of time until you can see it, and it took a while for me to be able to see it. And I still like that. Josh gets a little annoyed though. I will often have a quilt hanging in the dining room area. Kind of have an open floor plan here. And I'll have a quilt hanging in the dining room area so that way I can look at it while I'm cooking dinner or while I'm eating dinner. And I will often take another quilt in progress and pin it over the other one. So it's like I'm using a quilt as a design wall for another quilt. It drives Josh crazy because it looks really bad. And then I'm usually being fairly disrespectful to the quilt that's already on the wall. He's like, why are you sticking pins in that thing? Sometimes it's one of my, more elaborate goddess quilts on the wall. And he feels like that's a kind of a bad idea. I don't know. I just figure, hey, I made it. I can do whatever I want to with it, right? So yeah, I think that's an important part of the process. And if you don't have a place that you can hang up a quilt, look at maybe moving some furniture around so that you can put a quilt up where you spend a lot of time sitting. And I think eating is a great place because you're just kind of sitting there eating, and having something pretty to look at that you can kind of be mentally munching on at the same time really works. And it's something that I've had since we moved into this house. Basically, I've always had that wall be kind of special, where I can easily hang something up. If I take the quilt down, I can pop something up easily on a metal bar. I have kind of a magnetic hanger up there, so it works really, really well. So that's what I'm thinking about with this particular goddess quilt. And a lot of goddess quilts are on my mind right now, and I'll share a little bit more about that later. But I've just been starting to think through the process, and finishing. I have several that are in an unfinished state. And so I've been thinking about pulling those out and getting a lot more of them done. But I kind of don't, it's real easy to run down let's finish everything and get really overwhelmed. So I'm being very careful to just be like, all right, I'm going to take this one to completion, and then I'll go and grab another unfinished project and pull it out, and then slowly start to finish all of these tops that, I think I've got 4 unfinished quilt tops that I started, and then for whatever various reason, they never got completed. And I have a lot of quilts also that I designed and then I never took them anywhere beyond a paper drawing. So yeah, I've just been thinking about that a lot and working through those. Another thing that happened this week, I finished a very big quilt, and let me see if I can just show you a section of it here. This is the Tree of Life quilt. Yeah, it's too big. I can't hardly show you any of it, but you can see a picture of it. Go to the blog and check out the latest Frame Quilting Friday video. I shared how to quilt right to the edge of a quilt. And I realized that this is kind of one of those complex things with pantographs. And that is, a lot of times what I found where people were getting started kind of splitting the design in half at the beginning, so that whatever you ended up with at the end, you could kind of split the design up, and then it would look kind of balanced, I guess, where you have kind of half design starting at the beginning and end of a quilt. I'll be honest, that seems really complicated to me and really fussy. So I didn't do it that way. I started with a row right at the edge of the quilt. I stitched all the way down, and then I did the math on this, and the math did not work, meaning that you're either going to be losing or gaining length as you go. And when math doesn't work, for me, I'm just kind of like, whatever. If I can't divide the width of my pantograph by the length of the quilt and end up with a number and then it actually work out that way, like I think this was a 1/2 inch off of what it should have been, that tells me that we're gonna have a funky number no matter what. And there's not really a definite way that I could run a calculation on that and know I'm gonna be right every single time. Fabric and batting and all this stuff shift. And then Dad and I were both quilting on this quilt, and he might make a mistake and subtly shift something, or I might make a mistake and subtly shift something and have more space between one row and less space between the next row. There's no telling what could happen. So to me, making it a big to-do about starting the pantograph and ending the pantograph perfectly, that seems just a little crazy to me. So instead, I just had a partial row at the end. And I shared a video on this last Friday, so you can come and check it out. And it's basically just advancing the quilt one more time, making sure to secure that edge of the quilt nicely so that way it doesn't get all weird and pleaty and stuff as you stitch along it. And then figuring out how much of that row you need to stitch, spacing that out, you putting like a ruler or some kind of device over the pantograph so you only quilt as much as you need to, and then stitching that section. Overall, it was pretty simple, and I really enjoyed sharing this. As you can see, I do need to bind this quilt. That'll be something Dad does for me this week. But I absolutely love this texture. This is curvy chevron, and this is just a 5-inch, well, it's 4-inch pantograph with a 1/2 inch spacing between. And I just think that turned out so gorgeous. It's the perfect quilt for this green tree quilt. Perfect quilting design for this green tree quilt. And I'm delighted with this because it's gonna be so perfect for the couch. I brought it up here. It's like, I really need to get this thing bound and finished so I can enjoy curling up with it. I cannot wait. So that was an exciting finish. And I'll be honest, it's really hard when I get kind of stuck on a project. In this case, it was working on the book. And I didn't feel like I could really take the time to do anything else. And I realized that was kind of a problem. When I set myself a tight deadline and I can only do one thing, it really does make me actually fairly unhappy. And I was wanting to go do some other things and to work on, like I've been really wanting to work on the Miss Bunny Spoonflower panel and getting that done. And when I get laser focused, I'm very good about getting a project finished. But a lot of times it's that, telling myself, no, you can't work on that. No, you can't work on that right now. No, you have got to go finish the thing for that deadline. And that gets tough. And, I can only last on that for about a week or two before I'm like, I really want to go have fun. And so last night I just decided, you know what, I'm going to take a break, put all of this aside. I met my deadline, and then I went on and started messing around with my Spoonflower panel, so I'm working on that. I'm working on adding more elements to Miss Bunny's face so that whenever you get the panel, her mouth and her nose and her eyes are already there and printed for you. So that's already all taken care of for you. I'm playing around with different colors for her body, and then of course playing with different dresses and stuff too. So I'm experimenting with that and figuring out how to do the instructions on the panel. The panel that's like the hardest part because of course it's printed fabric, and I feel personally that is really hard to follow instructions on. So I'm trying to simplify that down, and yeah, it might just simply be that on the panel, I include the basic instructions and then just basically like come and watch the video tutorial, because there are tutorials on all the different steps of the Miss Bunny doll and how to make her dress and how to make her panties and all that good stuff. So yeah, I'm just working through that, processing it, and then I know that with every panel I create, I will learn something new. That is definitely for sure. So that's pretty much it for what's going on around the house. Not much to share this week, I'll be completely honest. it's just been between the book editing and getting sick and, just the normal craziness of life, you haven't really been feeling super creative. But I also know that if I'm patient with myself and kind of get through this stage and feel better, then of course I'll be able to share a lot more fun things in another week. So yeah, just trying to stay patient with that. Now, of course, if you would like to support the podcast and help the show continue, you can join the Leah's Quilt Friends Club at quiltfriends.club. This is a membership-only site where you can make friends around the world, you can ask questions, post pictures of your quilts, and you can participate in the How Do I Quilt This series. This is a special series of videos for members only. You can upload a picture of a quilt that you have created where you're wondering, how do I quilt this? And then I take the photos once a month and download them, and I share 3 different potential quilting designs. And I have been working on the designs for March, and we got a bumper crop of quilts. So this is taking me a little while, but it is so much fun. It pushes my design capabilities and is helping me work through that and develop some systems and ideas myself. And then I love seeing your gorgeous quilts. It's just so much fun. So I hope that you'll come and join in the fun and check this out. You can find it at quiltfriends.club. And a super special thank you to all of our new members over the last 2 weeks. Special thanks to Suzanne Newbeyer, Marlene Cummins, Lynn Marie Franklin, Catherine Ferrier, Narelle Forshaw, Amy Stevenson, Fran Nichols, Faith Smith, Evie Ann Strand, Ann Loring, Hope Cummins, Catherine Mamera, Diane Julesvig, Matilda London, Hermione Holmes, Jean Ackerman, and Elizabeth Murphy. Thank you guys so much for joining the Quilt Friends Club and becoming my best quilting friend. So now let's talk about finishing projects and getting to the point where you're ready to let something go. And I'm going to talk about a book that I've been working on that I have decided to set aside, and I might end up never publishing it. And that is the book I was just telling you guys about. Rise to the Challenge of Your Life is a book that I started right before Christmas. I wrote it in 4 weeks. That's the first draft. And then I've been editing it ever since. And I've reached the point with it this week where I just decided, you know what? I got so much out of this project. I learned so much about writing. I learned so much about myself. I enjoyed the process. I really, really did. But I'm not sure that this is the book I need to be writing right now. And I really need to start the Goddess Quilt book. The book that I've been needing to write for 5+ years now that I keep putting off. And it's really weird how I've been putting this book off. I have said that I wanted to write it. I've talked about writing it. I've written sections on it even, and then every time I stop and say something else is more important, and I put that other thing in front of this. And I reached a point while I was writing the challenge book that I recognized that this was not a good thing. I really needed to make the thing that my heart most needed to create. And this is, I think, my first kind of thing I want to share this week is that if there is a project that you've been wanting to pursue, don't wait. Don't keep putting it off. If you are bound and determined to make a double wedding ring quilt or a New York Beauty or a cathedral window or whatever it is, whatever challenging quilt that you would like to make, stop horsing around with 9 patches and double Irish chains. Go and do the quilt that you need to make. Even if you don't feel like you have the ability to make it right now. That's kind of the whole point. When you push yourself beyond what you know or you have your ability to do, that's where you do the most growing. Now, that is where you do the most crying and the most torture because it's hard to work beyond your skill level. But that is the area of greatest change and challenge. So I think that's a really, really good thing. So I think pursuing those things, that quilt or that project, that thing you need to write, that thing you need to paint, that thing you need to, draw, whatever it is, go on ahead and give yourself permission to do it. And it's like by writing this challenge book, I finally got to the point of saying, I need to give myself permission to write this other book. And I need to actually focus on that and make that happen. And I need to stop putting it off. And that was really good. That was really, really good. I think I would continue to have put that book off forever, indefinitely, if I had not really had that wake-up call. And so I think that's the number one most important thing. If you are working around on projects that you don't care about, you're just mucking around with them just to muck around with them, and you don't care about them at all, and they don't mean anything to you, and you've got something on your mind that's like, man, I really want to do this other thing. I really want to do this other thing. And you keep thinking that over and over and over again. That is regret. That is living in perpetual regret. You're wanting to do one thing, but you're doing something different. So that was the first step, was just identifying that. And I say, if that's how you're feeling, you have permission to clear the decks. You have permission to say, get it off the machine. I'm going to go work on this thing that I've been needing to make for 5 years. Get this off my long arm. I need to go make the quilts or finish the quilts that I've been needing to do for 10 years, whatever it is. And it could be as simple as you just really wanted to make a quilt out of special fabric, or you've really wanted to make a quilt out of, or use a unique technique that you've never used before, or a different style of quilt, an art quilt or a modern quilt or a traditional quilt. It doesn't matter what it is. If that has been what you've been wanting to do and you haven't been pursuing it, what are you waiting for? And when I asked myself that, I didn't particularly like the answer. I was getting in my own way, and once I actually took all of the barriers out of my way, when I actually considered, okay, what if I take this thing that I'm working on and I just set it aside? I just say, I'm stopping here with love and respect for this project. I love what it helped me do. I love where it got me. I'm going to set it aside. I'm going to go work on this thing that I have been needing to work on for this long. And I realized in that moment just how scary that is, because it's terrifying. I built this up in my head so much and made it kind of such a thing in my head for so long that it's really scary to consider actually taking the first step on that process. And I think that's another hallmark of living in regret, is just, it's kind of like having a missing limb. You're kind of banging around, it feels like you're missing something, but then actually acknowledging it and taking the first step to, making that thing real, it's scary, because then it's like, okay, well, what if I make that book and it's done? What do I do next? It's kind of, it's not even the worry about the project itself. It's just like, well, I would be fulfilling this thing that keeps me alive, this desire that keeps me alive, that keeps me ticking and working and wanting this thing. And then what happens whenever I actually do the thing I want to do and give into that? What if the world ends? What if I suddenly, I don't know, what if something crazy happens? What if I die after I write this book that I've wanted to write for years? And it's kind of, you have to say that stuff out loud. I'm kind of laughing at myself, because you got to say that stuff out loud to realize how silly it sounds. It is scary, because, if you want something and you want something badly enough, then it's obviously been on your mind, it's been in your heart, it's something that's worth pursuing, but then actually taking the first step and giving yourself permission to go do it is a scary thing. And also realizing that the only thing that has only ever been in the way is you, or in my case, me. I realized, I've been wanting to write this book for 5 years. At least, probably, honestly, a little bit longer than that. Pretty much from the time that I finished Shadow Self and My Cup Runneth Over, which was, I only had 4 goddess quilts at that point. I could already tell that was a potential book. And that was 2010, you know? So I could tell that that was definitely going to be something I wanted to write. And that was 9 years ago. So this is something that's very important that I really have been needing to give myself permission to pursue. And here's the interesting thing too. A lot of other people have been wanting it as well. And I've kind of just always been like, oh, well, maybe one day. And it's been my maybe one day thing. Maybe one day I'll do that. Maybe one day I'll write that book. Maybe one day I'll commit to that goal. Now I'm really good at committing to other goals. You know, I did the 365 project. I shared 365 free motion quilting designs. Now, not in a calendar year, over the course of 3 years, but you know, I'm able to rise to a challenge and see it through. And that's one of my strengths. But I have been good at that, you know, on certain things, you know, with certain things. This other personal stuff, the stuff that it feels like it's most important for me to create, not necessarily all that good about prioritizing it. And so that's another thing of just actually drawing the line in the sand and saying the thing that you want to make most is actually the most important, and that nothing else needs to come in your way. And that, I think, is the most important thing for being able to set other projects aside. So being able to look at that quilt that you might have been working on for 6 months now, you know, and to think about the quilt you've been wanting to make, and to actually say, okay, I'm going to set aside this quilt that I've been working on and go make the other thing that I want more. And that's scary because, of course, no one likes to be a quitter. I don't like to be a quitter. I don't like unfinished projects. I got far more unfinished projects than I would ever like to admit. I haven't done a count of them recently. We'll put it that way. But I would suspect that it's somewhere over 40 unfinished projects in the house. You know, it's just one of those things that adds up. You get started on something, run out of time, you put it in a box. You know, in this case, I'm clearing the decks of saying, I got this far in this book. I've got 90 pages. They're great. It still needs a lot of work. It still needs a lot of editing. But you know what? That's a digital file, and it doesn't take up that much room in my computer. I can set this aside with notes to myself as to what I need to do next. And maybe one day I'll go back to it. Maybe one day I won't. You know, maybe one day I won't need to. That's another thing to consider. Sometimes when you give yourself permission to make the thing, the quilt or the book or the painting or the art that you really want to make, you might not go back to the things that you did before. And that's okay too. That's also scary because, of course, then you might have a lot of materials and tools and things that you were using that you don't need anymore. And that's scary. That idea of change is scary. But I have to say, it's okay too. You know, it's okay, but you won't know, you know, I wouldn't go start trashing your supplies or anything like that because you won't know until you get there. And you won't know until you reach that point and you're like, wow, you know what? I painted this quilt and I never want to work with fabric again. I want to paint every quilt from now on, which means I don't need a fabric stash anymore. I just need white fabric and paint. You might one day reach that point. Who knows? You know, you might one day reach the point where you say, I never want to use another print fabric ever again because all I want to work with is batiks or silks or, you know, this other special stuff. And so I need to get rid of all my prints. Again, you won't know that until you actually take that step and start working in the direction that you want to work and give yourself permission to ask that question and then answer it. So I'd say, you know, in a lot of ways, it's terrifying. It's terrifying to set something aside. It's terrifying to take that first step. It's also terrifying to pursue something when you don't necessarily know the outcome and you're worried about how that might be perceived. You know, if you want to make a piece of art particularly, you know, it's one thing to crack together a 9-patch quilt. You know, it's a 9-patch. You know, I'm not dogging on 9 patches, guys. I'm really not. But it is 9 squares of fabric put together. If you want to make something, you know, like, let's say taking a photograph and taking that photograph and turning that into a realistic art quilt, that's a very, very different set of skills. You know, that's stitching it up a notch in a major way and that's going to require, a different form of learning, a different form of piecing, a different form of construction, new techniques, new skills, new ideas, all of that good stuff. And it's not going to be as cut and dry as just cutting out the pieces and piecing them together, right? So as I'm thinking through all of this, the hardest part for me is feeling like I reached this point, why not just finish it? I reached this point on the book, I did all this editing. I need to edit another 10 chapters, so it would be at least another month of editing continually. And I hate editing in general, so it would be kind of torture. So there's this temptation, though, because of inertia. Inertia is not necessarily being slow. Inertia is just continuing the movement that you've been moving. So whatever direction that you've been doing, whatever you've been doing, the easiest thing is to continue doing it and keep moving in that direction and continue that project that's on the table and then continue the next project that's on the stack. It's kind of wash and repeat, wash and repeat, wash and repeat, right? So I think that shaking it up and breaking free of that inertia is really tough. It's really tough to not feel like a failure. And it's really tough not to feel like I've wasted a lot of time. And I have burned quilts before. I took a quilt outside once. This is the story of St. Cole, and you can find another podcast episode about this quilt, actually. I took it outside and caught it on fire. Not necessarily because I, wanted the flames, although I felt like that was very symbolic for that quilt. I needed to be released from it. It was more like I didn't want to just throw it away. I wanted it to be gone. I wanted it to not exist anymore. And that was extremely beneficial. But I've had a lot of other UFOs, a lot of other projects that I just threw in the trash. So I was just like, I'm done with this. I just threw it in the trash. And in a lot of ways, I don't necessarily feel like that I felt released from the project, like actually unburdened by it. I think sometimes, every once in a while, I catch myself thinking about a project that I threw away, and I've regretted throwing it away because it was pretty interesting. I mean, it was not like spectacular or anything, but it was pretty interesting, and it was a good example of my skill at the time. And I liked the fabrics and I liked what was going on, but I didn't have the skill to quilt it. And there were some issues on it too, some fussing and stuff that I needed to do to hide some mistakes that I made. And I reached a point with it where I was just annoyed by it. I didn't want to take it on. I didn't know how I was going to finish it. I could easily take care of it today, but I threw it in the trash and got rid of it. And I kind of regret that. In a way, I wish I'd kept that particular one. But out of the dozens of quilts I've thrown in the trash over the years, that's the only one that really stands out in my mind as one that I regret getting rid of, right? So I'd say it's not too much of a worry. If I've thrown away, and I hate to say that I've thrown away at least 20 quilts over the years. I probably have. It's honestly probably more than that. I would regularly go through my studio and just kind of take stock of everything. And a lot of times I went through a phase, early in quilting where I had a lot of quilts with prints. I could not quilt them in video because you couldn't see a thing of what I was doing. And so I just, would reach a point where it's like, I can't quilt that in a video. I can't, there's no point in me working on it, or I can't quilt that in a video. I can't turn that into a tutorial. I don't have time to finish it any other way. And so a lot of those projects ended up in the trash. And out of all of them, like I said, there's only one really that I regret throwing away, because I look at it now and I think about that design and I think, that would be actually kind of a fun challenge to quilt it now. And it's not a problem. The design's still in my head. I can always make it again. I can always bring that back and make it a reality and not have those issues and mistakes and struggles that I was dealing with in the original. But I will be honest, it is hard to deal with the feeling that I wasted my time or that I'm quitting something before it's done. And how I'm dealing with that, with this at least, is I'm looking at it from the perspective of, well, I learned something, I got something out of it, I got what I needed out of it, most definitely. And then there's a difference between writing and publication too. Sometimes a book just needs to be written and it doesn't need to be shared. It doesn't need to be published. It doesn't need to go further than that. I hope one day, maybe, I'll publish this book, but it also felt kind of weird because it was about quilting, but it didn't have any quilts in it. It might be that this book needs to wait and I'll design new quilts around Challenge that would go with it. And then that would be a better illustration for it. That would make that book different. That would ground it in quilting, which is a good thing. And two, I'll be honest, when I shared about the book, even I sounded awkward when I talked about it because I hadn't fully wrapped my brain around what that book was and what it meant or how it was going to work. So by kind of just saying it was good, we had a good time, we had a great time together, but we're going to part ways now and go our own separate ways, I think that's fine. I'm just choosing to kind of say, okay, we're going to set that aside. It might be temporary. It might be forever. It might be a forever goodbye. I'll have a backup of it on a flash drive somewhere so that way, if something happens to my computer, that's okay. And just kind of let myself off the hook. And then I gave myself permission to just go ahead and start thinking in terms of the Goddess Quilt book. And as soon as I did, it was a wave of relief, really. Well, it was two parts. It was a wave of relief to finally pursue the book that I've been wanting to pursue for years. And then it was also a wave of fear of actually tackling this project and taking it on and seeing it through to completion and not doing what I've done for years, and that is pick it up and put it back down again. When I say I'm going to do something now, I am going to make it happen. It's not going to be a theory. It's going to happen, right? So in that sense, it felt great to actually say, all right, I'm setting this aside. I'm going to switch gears, and I'm allowed to switch those gears, and that feels awesome. There is still that lingering bit of guilt, there is that lingering bit of kind of like just feeling like I made something and I put time into it, and I need to continue it and keep going until I see it all the way through to the end. But if I have to consider, I usually publish one book a year. And that's usually about it. And if I have to consider which would I rather publish, the book that I've been wanting to write for 5+ years or the book that I only just started in January, I would really like to publish the book I've been wanting to create for that long. And so that kind of comes full circle. If there's something that you have been wanting to make and you've got other things in your way that are holding you back from pursuing that, clear the decks. Give yourself permission to clear the decks and consider, what do you really need? Do you need another bed quilt? Do you need another throw quilt? Do you really need that? Or do you want to make some art for your walls? Or do you want to challenge yourself to do a competition quilt or to enter a special exhibit, something along those lines? Because if that's been something that you've been wanting to pursue and you haven't been allowing yourself to pursue it, then you're holding yourself back. And you absolutely can clear the decks and basically just tell all of those projects, I will get back to you one day. One day I will absolutely pick you back up again and finish you and get you all the way to binding. And I think that once you reach that point, and certainly I am feeling at this point, just an immense relief. I want to feel lighter. I want to feel more carefree. I want to feel like this is an easy process that I can pursue, where I don't feel weighed down by all the things I should be doing or could be doing. That coulda, shoulda, woulda, all that stuff. I want to put all of that stuff aside so I can really enjoy this process. I've been wanting to go on this journey for 5+ years now. I want to enjoy it, right? So I hope that this episode has helped you think about the things that you're creating and to think about the things that you've been wanting to create. Because a lot of times we'll have in our heads or our hearts, we'll see something and it's like, oh man, I would really, really love to be able to make something like that. And then for whatever reason, we don't take that next step towards making those things that we want to create. I think that pursuing that is very, very important. I think it's essential, actually. And I'm finally giving myself permission to do this. So I hope that you enjoyed this podcast episode. I am very sorry if it was all over the place rambly. Just a process of a head cold, I think. And this helped me a considerable amount, I'll be completely honest. It is hard. It is hard to reach a stage of a project like a book and have 90,000 words on the page. Sorry, not 90,000, 45,000 words, 90 pages. To have any length like that done and finished, and to then say it's not going to become reality. But the other side of it, though, too, is, wow, I now have a completely cleared plate where I can go pursue this thing that I have been putting off for so long, and I cannot wait to see what happens next. So I'm excited about that. I hope that you're looking forward to this journey, going on this journey along with me, and I hope that you will push yourself to see the things that you are making and think about that. Think about the things that you really want to create, and if there's something that's been on your list for a while, start looking at how you can clear the decks so that you can work on that project right now or very next. So that's it for this episode. Please come and check out more Hello My Quilting Friends podcast episodes at leahday.com/podcast. And don't forget to join in the Quilt Friends Club so you can become my best quilting friend, share pictures, make friends with quilters around the world, and interact in a very friendly, kind platform. Come and check it out at quiltfriends.club. Until next time, let's go quilt.